Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and in this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night at the local time. First we're going to talk about Zaporozhye direction, where the Russians during the previous few days, weeks and months were bombing and pummeling this territory with significant number of missiles and aviation bombs. Let's increase the numbers of updates. And we were talking that very likely the Russians do have some plans to start offensive operations towards Urozhaine and Staromayorsk with the purpose to regain the lost positions during the Ukrainian greatest counter-offensive operation. And during the same period of time, the Russians conducted few offensives on the direction, but most of them were repelled. And today we got a very interesting video that was published by the Ukrainian sources, and the video show us the Ukrainian attempts to counterattack the lost positions. So very likely during the previous few days, after very powerful artillery preparation, the Russians managed to establish control over this defense belt right in front of Staromayorsk and Urozhaine. And then when the Ukrainians realized they lost their positions, they start counterattack with significant number of infantry and just one personnel carrier. As you can see in the video, the Ukrainians landed in the area and started storming the trenches, but let's say the Ukrainians wasn't successful. After they were completely empty, out of ammo, they decided to fall back. So based on that video, we have adjusted the map and we can make a conclusion that the battle for Staromayorsk-Urozhaine has started, and the Russians managed to establish control over the first positions to the south of the village. So very interesting what is going to be next. Now we are moving further to Novomikhailivka. We have received just one video, geolocated video from the armed forces of Ukraine. On this video we can see a small episode of FPV drone strike on Russian positions in the western part of the village. The video confirms the line of combat contact and, let's say, the Russian forces position in the area. So just another building, another street. We have adjusted the map because the previous line of combat contact went along this line, and now we have improved the Russian positions for another line of buildings in the western direction of Novomikhailivka. Now we are moving further to Krasnohorivka, where we can see the heaviest clashes since the beginning of probably this year. The Russians continue offensive operation. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces with artillery systems, with aviation bombs, with multiple launch rocket systems, with source flamethrower systems. So the Russians try to support the Russian offensive, the Russian assault operation that is currently taking place in the central part of the stronghold. So the Russians continue. The Ukrainians during the previous 48 hours made significant number of counterattacks, trying to force the Russians to fall back, but most of those counterattacks were repelled by the Russians. The Ukrainians, having significant losses, were forced to fall back. More and more additional reinforcements the Russians are sending inside of the village. Furthermore, we have a very important video from the southeastern part of Krasnohorivka, the area where, according to information we have, the Russians managed to establish a strong foothold. The Ukrainians tried to counterattack on this direction as well. They, let's say, entered the territory with max pros, with significant number of infantry. The Ukrainians tried to establish control over the building, but the attack was repelled also by the soldiers, Russian soldiers on the ground, and by the Russian counter-artillery fire. The Ukrainians were forced to fall back. Furthermore, today we have unconfirmed report from different Russian sources, mainly from different Russian sources, that the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt in the southeastern, southern and the central part of Krasnohorivka, and as a result of very heavy push, as a result of very heavy fire and attack, the Russians managed to establish control over the territory of something like this. Currently we don't have any geolocations proving this or video proving this, but we start receiving updates, which is also very important. So we'll see what is going to be next, and according to the sources we have, the Russians currently are storming the industrial area in the central part. If you ask my opinion, I don't believe such a significant progress. It's too much for one attack. But who knows, maybe the Russians managed to find a key, a solution how to break through the Ukrainian defense belt in a very short period of time. Now we are moving to Yasnobrodovka, Nitailovo, Первомайское area. If you remember, just yesterday we discussed that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over Первомайское. The Russians raised the flag in the northwestern part of the village, and we were expecting that the Russians, without even a short operational pause, will continue moving further to the west and northwest. And today we got the first geolocations confirming Russian attempts to cut the main road between Yasnobrodovka and Nitailova. For those purposes, the Russians were using significant number of armored vehicles, tanks, another tank rush, another armored vehicle attack. The Ukrainians, of course, published the video. To be more precisely, the forces of 71st and 25th Brigades of the Armored Forces of Ukraine published significant number of videos of FPV drone strikes, how they're trying to force the Russians to stop and to slow them down. Very likely the Ukrainians during that counterattacks managed to destroy or damage some Russian armored vehicles, but the geolocations are talking for themselves. The Russians managed to almost cross the fields, and very likely, once again, very likely, the Russians managed to physically cut the road between Yasnobrodovka and Nitailova itself. Significant progress, and very likely today we're going to receive additional updates about that operation, additional geolocations of Russian progress, let's say, along this road and along these three lines. And if this information confirmed, then we can say about the complete collapse of Yasnobrodovka, Manska, Nitailova fortifications, and the Ukrainians, due to the difficult situation, will be forced to fall back further to the west in direction of Karlovka and Karlovka water reservoir. But we can't, let's say, be 100% sure that even this defense belt will secure and save the Ukrainians from complete collapse. We haven't received anything from Berdichi and from Novobakhmutovka. After a few days of very active clashes in the direction, we see a short operational pause. Probably the parties are trying to regroup and to think what to do next. Now we are moving to Bakhmut-Artyomovsk direction, where the Russians continue offensive operation. There are very heavy clashes in the northeastern part of the eastern part of Chasiv Yar. We haven't received additional updates about further Russian progress inside of the residential area either in the eastern part of Chasiv Yar or Kalinovka and Bogdanovka itself. Of course, it's very unlikely it's going to happen today because the Russians managed to capture significant territories. They need to bring reserves, they need to bring their, let's say, rears, and they need to secure the territory, and then they can continue offensive. They need to bomb Ukrainians, let's say, fresh reinforcements that arrived in the area and so on. But despite the complete absence of progress on Kalinovka, Bogdanovka, and Chasiv Yar during the previous night, we have additional updates about the further Russian progress from Ivanovska to Seversky Donetsk Donbass Canal. We have additional progress that was confirmed by different mappers, so the Russians are getting closer and closer to the canal. And if the Russians, and currently the distance between the main Ukrainian road supply area and the Russian edge positions is less than, let's calculate, less than 1.5 kilometers. So it's a very short distance, and obviously the Russians will try to bypass the short distance very fast as possible. Furthermore, we got additional reports from Konstantinovka itself. Now, when we were talking about the battle for Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar was the main base, the main command center, the main, let's say, concentration of reserves and so on. But now, due to the fact of the beginning of battle for Chasiv Yar, now Konstantinovka plays the same role of Chasiv Yar, of concentration forces, reserves, ammunition, and so on. So that's why the Russians are bombing this territory heavily with all types of weapons they have. On this video, for example, we can see another warehouse that was discovered by the Russians, and as a result of Iskander strike, that warehouse was destroyed. Currently, we don't know for sure the level of losses the Ukrainians suffered in the direction. Also, we have the same video from another angle, so we see that the Russians are bombing Konstantinovka heavily, and this is a very big town. Konstantinovka is a very big town, probably like Bakhmut. Chasiv Yar is not so big in comparison with Bakhmut and Konstantinovka. Before the special military operation, there were living more than 100,000 people, obviously, and now the sources are saying that during the next few days, maybe weeks, the Ukrainian authorities will announce a total and complete evacuation from this stronghold as well. We haven't received anything from Siver's direction, just geolocated map confirmations from different mappers about further Russian progress along the railways to Vyemka, and the Russians continue pummeling and FPV droning the Ukrainian forces on the southern part of the Bilogorovka. So the situation in this area continues developing not very good for the Ukrainians. Now we're coming to the southern Kupiansk directions, to the area of clashes between the Russians and the Ukrainians along the Zhiribets river. And when talking about this territory, we can say that the situation on this direction develops in Ukrainian favor. Some Ukrainian soldiers posted the video from inside of Terny. As we can see, the village was completely destroyed, reduced to ruins as a result of Russian artillery strikes. Most of the buildings were buried out, were, let's say, destroyed. The Ukrainians are preparing the foothold for further defense operation. And but regarding this situation inside of the village, we got the first geolocations, or probably the second geolocation from the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainians of the 60th Mechanized Brigade published the video of few more Ukrainian counterattacks on the Russian positions. So step by step, slowly, square meter by square meter, but the Russians started, let's say, falling back on Terny direction. The Russians during the previous 4 or 5 months conducted significant number of attempts to attack the Ukrainians in Zhiribets, but due to the very big distance between Zhiribets River, Terny, Yampolovka, and the main Russian base in Kremenaya and Dibrova, due to the fact that Ukrainians have very good FPV forces in the area, the Russians lost the battles during the previous months, and now probably the Russians are exhausted. The Ukrainians, of course, are not exhausted. They were using just FPV drones to stop the Russians, and now slowly, step by step, the Ukrainians started counterattacks. And according to the map, as you can see, the previous week, the biggest progress of the armed force of Russian Federation just during the previous week was something like this. So the Russians managed to reach almost the outskirts of Terny, so they were, let's say, in less than in 1 kilometer in front of the village itself, so just 700 meters. But starting this week, the Ukrainians started counterattacking the Russians, and the Russians started falling back towards Terny and Dibrova, suffering very big losses. So just during the previous week, the Russians lost this square, and today we got another geolocation that confirms additional progress of the armed forces of Ukraine, and the Russians lost another square on this direction. So currently we will color this territory as a gray zone due to the geolocations we receive on the direction. So the Russians are falling back. Now they need to find a solution how to stabilize the situation, and it's going to be very difficult because the Ukrainians have a lot of towns in the area where they can hide artillery, FPV drones and so on, and soldiers, and the Russians have just fields behind them, significant number of fields and very big distance to the closest positions in Zvanovka, Zhitlovka, Kremenaya. So the situation is going to get worse and worse on this direction for the Russians, as I understand. North in Kupiansk direction we haven't received nothing, as well as nothing from Kharkiv direction. During the previous 24 hours, I believe everybody's seen the video of Russian Iskander strike on the concentration of Ukraine artillery forces in the vicinity of the village Akhtirka in Sumy area. As a result of the strike, significant number of D-20 howitzers were destroyed. One important note about this attack: if you open any map, Google map, any other map you have, and if you zoom in beta exactly on this storage, you're gonna see all these artillery systems on the street. So the thing is that the Russians destroyed the concentration of D-20 howitzers, not those D-20 howitzers that were redeployed, let's say, a week ago, and the Russians managed to discover them and then to destroy them to reduce and to, let's say, Ukrainian artillery possibilities. The thing is that this warehouse and these howitzers have been staying on the street since probably 2014. So I would not be surprised if those were just, let's say, broken D-20 howitzers, or nobody needed those D-20 howitzers or something like this. So once again, the Russians managed to destroy, but once again, those howitzers have been staying there since 2014, or maybe somewhere there. So few years, and nobody touched them, nobody was, let's say, operating with them. So we can't tell for 100% sure that those, let's say, howitzers were correct and that Ukrainians could use them, let's say, in the special military operation. Of course, the picture is very good, but the results, I'm not sure about this. Now let's move to Kiev. We have additional reports, and according to information we have, there are going to be no demobilization or rotation in the armed forces of Ukraine. The Rada Committee on National Security and Defense excluded the provisions on demobilization and rotation of military personnel from the draft law on mobilization. The exclusion of the issue of demobilization from the bill was initiated by Syrsky personally, by the head of the Ukrainian army. So no demobilization. The Ukrainians will will fight till the last Ukrainian. And the sources, according to the open source information, since the beginning of the special military operation, the Ukrainians lost up to 3,212 officers of different ranks, starting from the let's say surgeons, probably lieutenants, and up to maybe generals or something like this. Significant losses, obviously. Furthermore, Zelensky continued begging and asking the Western countries to give him weapon. He says that our partners have the necessary weapon. I don't understand why we don't get them. Nobody understands why Western countries stop supporting Ukraine with a weapon. Probably they have some personal, some business or political issues, and this situation, let's say, makes less and less chances for Ukraine to win the special military operation. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.